He owned newspapers, politicians, cities. He shaped public opinion, ruined careers, and bent reality to his will. And yet, when Charles Foster Kane died, there was no one in the room with him. Only a house so vast that sound itself seemed to get lost inside it. A house filled with treasures from all over the world, statues, paintings, animals, memories that did not belong together. A house built to contain everything. And in the end, it contained only silence. This is not just the story of a man, and it is not just the story of a building. It is the story of how a house, meant to be a symbol of power, slowly became a prison. Because Xanadu was never simply a home. It was a statement, a declaration, an answer to a question Kane had been asking his entire life. What do you build when the world takes something from you that you can never get back? Most people believe that success looks like expansion, more space, more wealth, more control. But Citizen Kane offers a darker idea. Sometimes the bigger the house, the smaller the life inside it becomes. Xanadu rises on the screen like a monument, not warm, not inviting, but distant, unreachable. From the very first moment we see it, the film tells us something is wrong. The gates are closed, the windows are dark. The structure feels less like a residence and more like a fortress guarding a secret, or perhaps guarding a wound. Because houses are never neutral. They reflect the people who build them, their fears, their desires, their unspoken regrets. And Xanadu reflects a man who believed that if he could build something large enough, powerful enough, magnificent enough, it would finally protect him from loss. But protection can easily turn into isolation. Xanadu was designed to impress the world, to overwhelm it, to stand as physical proof that Charles Foster Kane had won. Won against poverty, won against insignificance, won against the feeling of being small. Yet the film quietly asks a different question. What if the house that proves your power also proves your loneliness? Kane does not build Xanadu to live in it. He builds it to be seen, to be spoken about, to exist as an extension of his ego, frozen in stone and steel. This is a house meant to dominate the landscape, not belong to it. A palace perched above the world, looking down, never standing among. And from the very beginning, we understand something unsettling. This house is not growing with Kane. It is growing away from him. Every added room increases the distance between people. Every hallway stretches conversations thinner. Every echo replaces intimacy. Xanadu does not bring others closer to Kane. It pushes them further apart. And this is where the real tragedy begins. Because long before Xanadu becomes a prison of walls and gates, Kane has already learned what it feels like to be trapped. Not by architecture, but by separation, by loss. By the moment when a child is removed from the only place he ever felt whole. Xanadu is not the origin of Kane's loneliness. It is the result of it, a response to something broken long before the first stone was laid. The house promises safety, control, permanence. But houses built on emotional absence cannot give warmth, only scale. And scale is a poor substitute for love. So when we look at Xanadu, we are not looking at a dream fulfilled. We are looking at a defense mechanism turned into architecture, a childhood wound stretched into a skyline. And the question is no longer why Kane built the house. The real question is, why did he think it would save him? Because from this moment on, every room we enter, every object we see, every corridor that stretches just a little too far, will bring us closer to the same realization. Xanadu was not built to keep the world out. It was built to keep something in. And slowly, it became a place no one could escape. Long before Xanadu existed, long before power, money, or influence, Charles Foster Kane learned what it meant to lose control. And it did not happen in a palace. It happened in a small wooden house in the snow with a sled. The most important moment in Kane's life is not his rise to power. It is not his political defeat. It is not his death. It is the moment when a decision is made for him. Inside the house, adults speak calmly. rationally. They talk about contracts, responsibility, and opportunity. Outside, a child plays. The camera places him far away, framed through a window, already separated, already distant. Even before the words are spoken, the film visually imprisons him. This is where the pattern begins. Kane does not lose his parents through death or violence. He loses them through agreement, through paperwork, through a choice that is logical, but emotionally devastating. And that is what makes it so powerful, because trauma is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wrapped in good intentions. The house that should have been a place of safety becomes a place where Kane is signed away. And from this moment on, home is no longer something he belongs to. It is something that can be taken. The sled in the snow is more than a symbol of innocence. It represents something Kane never stops chasing. A moment before separation, before doors closed, before life was decided by someone else. When Kane is taken from that house, he is not just losing his family, he is losing a sense of scale. As a child, the world makes sense. It is small enough to feel manageable. Rooms feel intimate. Voices feel close. After that moment, everything expands. Spaces become larger. Relationships become colder. People become distant. And Kane spends the rest of his life trying to reverse that expansion. But he never does. Instead of returning to small spaces, he builds larger ones. Instead of recreating closeness, he recreates control. This is the psychological blueprint of Xanadu. Because if you were once powerless, power feels like safety. If you were once removed from your home, ownership feels like protection. Kane does not trust emotional bonds. They failed him first. So he trusts structures, walls, gates, titles, institutions, things that do not leave. But there is a flaw in this logic. Structures can protect the body, but they cannot protect the heart. The house Kane lost as a child was not grand. It was not impressive. It had no statues, no gates, no legacy. But it had presence, and presence cannot be replicated with wealth. Xanadu is an attempt to do exactly that, to rebuild a moment that cannot be rebuilt, to freeze a sense of safety in stone. But safety born from control is fragile. The moment control slips, the structure collapses emotionally, even if it remains standing physically. This is why Kane's relationships always follow the same pattern. He surrounds himself with people, but never lets them inside. He gives them space, but not access. Just like the house he will later build. Large rooms, high ceilings, emotional distance. Xanadu does not appear suddenly in Kane's life. It grows naturally out of this moment. Out of the first time he learned that love is conditional, that home can be temporary, that stability is something others decide for you. So when Kane later builds a house no one can take away from him, it is not arrogance, it is fear. Fear disguised as ambition. Fear disguised as greatness. And that fear will shape every corridor, every wall, every empty space inside Xanadu. Because the first prison Kane ever experienced had no bars, only adults, paperwork, and a door that closed behind him. From that point forward, he never stops building doors. When Charles Foster Kane begins to build Xanadu, it is not presented as an act of madness. It is presented as an achievement, a headline-worthy project, a physical manifestation of success, proof that Kane has arrived, and arrived on his own terms. The house rises as Kane's influence rises, as his newspapers grow, as his voice becomes louder, as his name begins to shape the country. Xanadu is not separate from this ascent. It is part of it. The house is designed to be seen from afar, to dominate the landscape, to declare ownership not just of land, but of perspective. This is not a home nestled into its environment. It is a structure imposed upon it. And that distinction matters, because homes grow out of lives, palaces grow out of egos. Xanadu is built with the logic of conquest. Every wall says, I can afford this. Every gate says, I control access. Every imported artifact says, The world belongs to me. Kane does not collect objects because he loves them. He collects them because they represent victory. Statues from Europe, animals from distant continents, art stripped of its context and relocated into isolation. Just like Kane himself, the irony is almost cruel. Kane surrounds himself with evidence of culture, yet the house itself has none. No history, no warmth, no memory created through shared experience, only acquisition. Xanadu is not built to hold moments. It is built to hold possessions, and possessions do not talk back. They do not disagree. They do not leave. For a man who learned early that people can be taken away, this kind of silence feels comforting, at first. But architecture does not remain neutral over time. The scale of Xanadu begins to change the way people behave inside it. Voices drop, movements slow, conversations stretch across impossible distances. Intimacy dissolves in the air between rooms. What once felt impressive begins to feel cold. The house amplifies Kane's authority, but it also amplifies his isolation. This is the paradox at the center of Xanadu. The more power Kane accumulates, the less accessible he becomes, not just to others, but to himself. He no longer adjusts his space to fit human needs. He expects humans to adjust to the space. And they try, at first. Guests marvel at the scale. They are impressed, overwhelmed. But admiration is not connection, and admiration fades quickly in rooms that feel empty. The house does not encourage people to stay close. It encourages them to keep their distance. Wide tables, long corridors, high ceilings that swallow sound. Every design choice reinforces hierarchy. There is always a sense that Kane is above others, literally and figuratively. Even when he shares a room, he never truly shares space. This is where the house begins to push back, because spaces shape behavior. They teach us how to move, how to speak, how to relate. Xanadu teaches separation, and slowly that lesson takes root. Kane begins to confuse size with significance. If a room feels empty, he builds another one. If silence grows, he fills it with objects. But the emptiness remains. Because emptiness is not a spatial problem. It is an emotional one, and no amount of square footage can solve it. By the time Xanadu is complete, it no longer represents possibility. It represents finality. A place so massive that change feels impossible. A structure so heavy that it cannot adapt. This is the moment where the house stops being a symbol of ambition and starts becoming a monument. And monuments are built for the dead. Even while Kane is alive, Xanadu feels like a mausoleum, a place designed to preserve an image, not to support a life. The house now stands as a mirror of Kane himself, impressive, powerful, impenetrable, and completely alone. What Kane does not yet realize is that the house has already begun to decide things for him, just as others once did. The walls are up, the distances are set, the isolation is built in. From this point forward, Xanadu no longer waits for Kane to change. It waits for him to surrender. At some point, Xanadu stops being something Kane controls. It becomes something that controls him. Not through force, not through walls or locks, but through distance. The house begins to dictate how people interact inside it, where they stand, how far apart they sit, how long a silence can last before it becomes uncomfortable. This is most clearly visible in Kane's relationships, especially with Susan Alexander. What begins as affection slowly dissolves into formality, and then into resentment, not because they stop caring, but because the space between them grows too large to cross. The famous breakfast table scenes are not just about time passing. They are about space expanding. At first, Kane and Susan sit close. The table is manageable. Their voices reach each other without effort. But as the relationship deteriorates, the table grows longer. The distance between them becomes absurd. The house exaggerates what they feel, until emotion turns into geometry. It is no longer possible to ignore. Xanadu demands separation. Susan does not fail Kane. The house isolates her. She is placed into vast rooms meant for admiration, not comfort, rooms that echo her loneliness back at her. Kane fills the house with noise, music, parties, performances. But noise is not connection, and applause is not love. Susan's opera career is staged inside this same logic. Kane believes that if he builds a stage large enough, if he commands admiration loudly enough, he can force fulfillment into existence. But fulfillment cannot be commanded. The more Kane pushes, the more Susan retreats. Not because she is weak, but because the environment gives her nowhere to feel small, safe, or human. Xanadu offers spectacle, not shelter, and spectacle is exhausting to live inside. The house amplifies Kane's need for control. It makes his presence overwhelming. Even his attempts at generosity feel suffocating. When Susan fails on stage, the house does not absorb the disappointment. It reflects it back, magnified. High ceilings turn failure into humiliation. Large halls turn arguments into performances. Nothing in Xanadu is private. And yet, everything is emotionally distant. This contradiction breaks people. Susan does not leave Kane because she stops loving him. She leaves because the house leaves her no space to exist as herself. There is no corner to retreat into, no room that belongs to her. Xanadu belongs to Kane. And in a house that belongs entirely to one person, everyone else is a guest, even a wife. When Susan finally leaves, the house does not react. It does not change. It remains massive, silent, unmoved. And this is perhaps the cruelest moment of all. The house that was built to prevent loss survives loss effortlessly. It stands intact while Kane collapses inside it. This is where Xanadu fully becomes a prison. Not because Kane cannot leave, but because leaving would mean admitting failure. Admitting that all this space, all this power, all this effort could not keep a single person close. So Kane stays. He wanders through rooms filled with objects he does not use, memories he did not create, art he does not understand. The house becomes a labyrinth of reminders. Each room whispers the same truth. You built this to avoid loneliness, and it made you lonelier. From this point on, Kane is no longer expanding his life. He is maintaining a structure. And structures do not love back. They only endure. The house that once symbolized possibility now preserves emptiness. And emptiness, unlike people, never leaves. After Susan leaves, Xanadu does not grow quieter. It grows heavier. Not with people, but with things. Crates arrive from all over the world. Statues, paintings, furniture stripped from other lives, other homes, other histories. Each object carries a past, just not Kane's. Xanadu becomes a warehouse of meaning that does not belong to the man who owns it. This is not appreciation. It is accumulation. Kane does not collect to remember. He collects to fill rooms, to fill silence, to fill the space left behind by absence. But absence does not respond to objects. No matter how rare or expensive, they remain silent. The house now resembles a museum more than a residence, and museums are places we walk through, not places we live inside. Nothing in Xanadu is touched with familiarity. Nothing shows signs of daily life. There are no worn corners, no favorite chairs, no rooms shaped by habit. Only storage, endless storage. The camera emphasizes scale again. Workers unpacking items that will never be used, statues placed where no one will look at them. This is wealth without intimacy. Kane has everything except context. Objects lose meaning when they are disconnected from experience. A painting without a memory is decoration. A statue without a story is weight. Xanadu collapses under the burden of unclaimed significance. Kane walks through these rooms like a visitor in his own life. He owns everything. He belongs nowhere. This is the final evolution of the house. What began as a fortress becomes an archive, a place designed to preserve, not to live. and preservation is the opposite of growth. The irony deepens. Kane's entire public identity was built on shaping narratives, on controlling stories, on deciding what mattered. Yet in his own home, meaning slips away from him. He cannot remember why he bought half the objects surrounding him. They blur together. Because meaning does not come from ownership. It comes from connection. And Xanadu has erased connection through scale. At this stage, the house no longer even pretends to offer comfort. It exists to store evidence of a life that never fully happened. Rooms become indistinguishable, objects pile up, time loses texture. The days blend together. This is what happens when a home is designed to impress the world instead of supporting a human being. It becomes a space where life cannot leave a trace. Kane is surrounded by history, yet he is completely disconnected from it. The house does not remind him of who he was. It reminds him of what he never became. Xanadu has succeeded in one thing only. It has made absence permanent. And permanence is terrifying. Because as long as the house stands unchanged, Kane cannot pretend that this is temporary. There is no illusion left. Only endurance. Only survival. Only the slow realization that he has outlived the purpose of the structure he built. And still, there is one thing missing. One thing that never arrived in a crate. One thing that cannot be purchased, imported, or displayed. Something small. Something fragile. Something from a time before power. Something Kane has been circling his entire life without realizing it. And it is waiting for him at the very end. In the end, Charles Foster Kane does not think about Xanadu. He does not think about power, or legacy, or the empire he built. He thinks about something so small that it is almost invisible next to the house he created. A word, spoken quietly, almost accidentally. Rosebud. The film does not present this moment as a revelation to Kane. It is not a realization. It is a reflex. A final return to a place his mind has never left. Because Rosebud is not an object. It is a sensation. It is the memory of being held in a world that felt close. A world with boundaries small enough to feel safe. Before scale replaced intimacy. Before space replaced presence. Before ownership replaced belonging. The sled is not important because it is a sled. It is important because it belongs to a time when Kane did not need to build walls, when home was not something he had to defend. Xanadu was designed to recreate safety, but safety is not created through size. It is created through connection, and that connection was lost long before the house existed. This is why Xanadu fails, not because it is too big, but because it is answering the wrong question. Kane believed that if he could own the world, he would never be taken from it again. But what he wanted was not ownership, it was return. A return to a moment that could not be preserved, replicated, or purchased. The tragedy of Xanadu is not that it isolates Kane, it is that it distracts him. It gives him something to build so he never has to face what cannot be rebuilt. Rosebud does not destroy Xanadu physically, it destroys it symbolically. Because the smallest memory renders the largest structure meaningless. In the final images of the film, we watch the contents of Kane's life reduced to smoke. Crates opened, objects discarded, histories erased. And Rosebud burns, unrecognized, unmourned. The house survives. The meaning does not. Xanadu stands tall, even as the truth disappears inside it. And that is the final cruelty. The house that was meant to preserve Kane's inner world outlives the only thing that mattered. Rosebud was never inside Xanadu, because Xanadu was built to avoid it, to bury it under scale, under noise, under achievement. But memory does not obey architecture. It surfaces at the end when control is gone, when space no longer matters, when only feeling remains, and that feeling exposes the truth. Xanadu was not a failed home. It was never meant to succeed. It was a detour, a monument to avoidance,
a structure built around the absence of something Kane could never name until it was too late. Xanadu still stands when the story ends, empty, silent, unchanged. And that is the point, because houses do not collapse when lives inside them do. They endure, they wait, they preserve the outline of what once was, even when meaning is gone. Xanadu is not unique because it is large. It is unique because it reveals something uncomfortable, that architecture does not fix emptiness. It amplifies it.
A house does not heal what was broken before it was built. It only gives that fracture a shape. Kane believed that if he made his world big enough, pain would become insignificant inside it. But pain does not shrink with scale. It echoes. The bigger the space, the louder the silence. This is why Xanadu feels less like a home and more like a warning, a reminder that success can be expansive while life becomes narrow, that protection can become isolation, that control can replace closeness, that permanence can trap what should be allowed to change. Xanadu did not imprison Kane physically. He could leave at any time. What imprisoned him was the idea that leaving would mean facing what he built the house to avoid. And so he stayed, not because he was forced to, but because he was afraid of what existed outside the walls, or rather, what no longer existed anywhere. The tragedy of Charles Foster Kane is not that he lost everything. It is that he gained so much while losing the ability to recognize what mattered. Xanadu gave him ownership. But ownership is not belonging. It gave him safety. But safety without intimacy is emptiness. It gave him permanence. But permanence without meaning is death in slow motion. In the end, the house does exactly what it was designed to do. It keeps the world out. And in doing so, it keeps Kane alone. Xanadu was not too big for him. He was too alone for it. And that is why the house feels haunted, not by ghosts, but by absence, by conversations that never happened, by rooms never filled with life, by a childhood that could not be rebuilt. This is not just Kane's story. It is a reminder that homes are not measured in size, but in presence, that walls cannot replace warmth, that scale cannot replace closeness, and that if you build something to protect yourself from loss, you may end up protecting yourself from life. Because some things cannot be contained. Some things cannot be owned. And some houses, no matter how grand, will only ever be prisons. If this story stayed with you, there are many more like it here.